It's the Gen Zer, and I'm back. Today, guys, we're going to react to this video discussing that Gen Z voters want absolutely nothing to do with the party of the elephant. Let's see what they have to say here.
But there is a problem. There's a big problem, by the way, facing the Republican Party. And that problem happens to be that the largest voting bloc in the United States, millennials and Generation Z voters, absolutely despise the Republican Party.
Now, before we go any further, I will say I'm not a big fan of the Republican Party, but be that as it may, I don't think making such a broad and just an overbroad statement as he just made is going to make for a good discourse. Of course, yes, younger people tend to vote more liberally, and that's always been proven to be the case all through the 1960s, all through now, throughout most of time. Younger people tended to be more liberal, and as they got older, they got more conservative. Be that as it may, I wouldn't go out on a limb and say that the Republican Party is completely struggling with younger voters. Certainly, they are getting less of the vote than the Democratic Party is, but be that as it may, I wouldn't put in the term which this individual just put it in there unless he has the statistic to back it up. So let's see what Mr. David Pacman has to say further.
New data has come out from the 2022 election that tells us that 77% of Generation Z voters said they voted for a Democratic candidate for Congress last year versus only 21% who said they voted for a Republican.
Well, I was asking for data, and there it is. I guess based on that data, then it is not too much of a stretch to say that Gen Z, as a generation and as an overall group, does tend to lean liberal and less likely to vote for Republicans. Be that as it may, though, I still think that making such a broad statement, such as Gen Z voters want nothing to do with Republicans, is quite misleading because it can change at any time and it can lead the audience to have a different idea than what the reality actually is. Based on that statement, I would assume that, okay, maybe 95% of Gen Zers are voting against the Republican Party, but that doesn't seem to be the case. 21% of anything is still a substantial amount. That's one in five. That's not a majority in this case. That's not even a plurality, but that's still a substantial proportion.
So we've got a 77 to 21% split between Generation Z voters alone. And of course, millennials, maybe not that extreme, but still overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. Those two blocks combined now make up the largest voting bloc in the United States, outnumbering the baby boomers, which happens to be the largest voting bloc for the Republicans. Republicans also have the added, I don't want to call it tragedy, but I guess it is a tragedy, of the fact that they let a lot of their followers and supporters die during the pandemic. They were out there trashing vaccines. They were out there telling people,
Before we go any further here, let me go ahead and pause this here. So, while it may be true that Gen Z and millennials, when combined, make up the largest voting bloc, they have to be combined. So, those two generations have to be combined in order for that voting bloc to be the largest voting bloc. Boomers are the most reliable voting bloc. You see, every single election, boomers go out and they vote not only in greater numbers than any other generation, they also vote in greater proportion than any other generation. Boomers have the highest voter turnout rate, which I'll be honest with you, Gen Z is not going to have as high, nowhere near as high a voter turnout rate as the boomers. I don't even think that's even possible for now. And also, the millennials, not even the millennials who are older than Gen Z are going to go out and vote at the same rate or even near the same rate as the boomers. Um, Maybe that might change, but as of now, boomers always consistently show up to the polls and support their candidate. And as David just stated here, boomers are more likely to be Republican. They're more likely to vote with the Republican agenda. So there's still a battle here, a political battle here in the United States. It's very much so ongoing. It is nowhere near finished. And also, addressing his statement about the pandemic, well, although quite a lot of people died due to the pandemic, approximately 1 million Americans, if I'm not mistaken, died. And I recall that statistic from around 2021. Of course, I'm sure more people have died since then. 1 million Americans is a very substantial number, but be that as it may, out of 300 million people, or country of 330 million people, it it may be a statistical blimp on the radar. And not only older people were affected by COVID, but certainly quite a bit of younger people died as well, although older people were far more likely to die as a result of the pandemic. Be that as it may, even if the Republican policies might have led to more deaths to COVID, let's give credence to that. That's not enough to shave away a huge cohort of their voting bloc. That's not sufficient enough.
You don't have to wear a mask. That's oppression. And they saw a lot of their voters, a lot of their supporters, a lot of their core base die off because of that. And I think
Guys, we're probably gonna have to get YouTube Premium as I go further into
by the
doing.
way, that is a statistic. It's a grim statistic, but that's something that most
I'll probably get YouTube Premium further down the line as I make more reactions. I apologize for these delays, so let's keep on going.
people completely ignored during the 2022 midterms. I mean, I talked about it a lot because study after study after study showed us that the COVID death rates in red areas of the country, red counties, were exponentially higher than in blue counties. That may be one of the reasons why Republicans, who a year ago were predicting a 70-seat pickup in the House, only have a couple seats in their majority. I think
Even though COVID did disproportionately impact red areas in the United States more so than blue areas, it still stands that the number of people who died as a result of COVID was not enough to statistically move the needle politically. That I mean, if you lose first of all, up until 2021, approximately 1 million people died of COVID, right? And if if from that million, let's say approximately 70% were Republicans, because of Democrats also died from COVID too. COVID is a disease, and diseases do not care about your creed, race, religion, and of course your political affiliation. A disease kills everyone. However, in this case, certainly red areas were disproportionately affected. I still don't think that's a legitimate argument to use COVID as an excuse as to why Republicans are losing elections. I think the policies, especially local elections, the policies stand to be what drive most voters. And if Republicans are losing national elections, then more likely than not, nationally, they don't have the appeal which they want to have or they think they should have. I think that's the more plausible explanation than simply providing the argument that, hey, because of COVID, Republican voters are dying. I think that's a very lazy argument.
that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, especially since we still have people dying in this country of COVID, and those deaths are the overwhelmingly unvaccinated part of the population. So Republicans have a problem with their voting bloc because they're still letting them die off. And then they got a problem with the young voters who want nothing to do with the Republican Party. And the reason, of course, is because young voters, the millennials and the Generation Z voters overwhelmingly support action on gun control. They overwhelmingly support taking action on the issue of climate change. They overwhelmingly support LGBTQ issues. They support access to abortion. They support all of the things that Republicans have openly declared war on here in the United States. And what's fun is that the Republicans have obviously, you know,
So, well,
acknowledged this. But here is what Ronna McDaniel, the chair of the Republican National Committee, had to say.
before he reads the quote from the chair of the Republican National Committee, on these issues, on the aforementioned issues which he has cited, the Republican Party definitely tends to be against the ideals and the policies which most Gen Zers would like to see enacted. That is certainly true. However, we have to understand that these opinions held by Gen Z, they're not static. And first of all, they're not static, and they're just representative of the overall Gen Z population. If we look at various subgroups, there are certain subgroups where Republicans will perform much better than other subgroups. And also, all of these policies which Mr. Pacman has named are all culture war issues. And I view culture war issues as essentially issues, or I view culture war issues not as substantially as I view economic issues. You see, economic issues permeate our everyday lives. We can see that every single where we go. What is the cost of gasoline? Hmm? How much does food cost? Those are the basic necessities which we use every single day. We interact with the economy every single day of our lives. So if the economy is in a negative state and democratic policies are not helping with that, no matter the generation, listen, the opponents of economic policies which are not helping the youth will usually lose in elections, no matter the opponent. Now, cultural war issues, I view them more as symbolic issues. Yes, they do matter. They do impact our lives. I will not say they don't. And for some, they may impact their lives more than others. For LGBTQ individuals, Republican policies are a matter of their very being. But let's be honest here, the overwhelming majority of any population is not going to be LGBTQ. That's that's always a significant minority. Not significant minority. That's a strong minority, as in that's going to be just a minority of the population. Really it's generally never over 10% of the generation of any population, be that matter for that matter, no matter the generation. So what I'm trying to say is that just because Gen Z believes culturally that the Republican Party does not have the right position on these issues, that does not mean that these are the only issues which Gen Z will be voting on. Especially Gen Zers who have already started to work, Gen Zers who are in the workforce and are probably struggling with the cost of housing, struggling with the cost of living. They might look at their economic state much closer than they would look at, the state of the cultural practices which Republicans want to enact, essentially. Let's get back to the video here.
When we do that and we talk about economic opportunity, the things our party stands for, we'll win those voters over. We just have to compete for them. See, here's the problem with your plan, Rana. First of all, it's completely wrong anyway. Second of all, you don't have a plan to pitch to these voters. You don't have a plan to pitch to any voters. Right now, the only plans we're hearing about from the Republican Party are let's raise the retirement age for the young people. Let's make them just keep working and working and working and working. And Nikki Haley has that.
Yeah, that is not a good policy. They are not going to pick up. any votes from young people based on that policy alone, I can tell you that is a negative policy for the Republican Party. If the Republican Party actually tries to go through with that policy, they might doom themselves for ages to come. Listen, another party might be created from the ashes of the Republican Party. I actually predict that. Let me predict that. I think a libertarian party is in order. And of course, I understand that there is already a third party, Libertarian Party. Either they might pick up much more popularity and become the replacement of the Republicans within the two-party system if the two-party system remains, or America might be headed towards a multipolar uh, multiple party system. I see the latter as being quite unlikely, and I see the former as the status quo. So more likely than not, the Republican Party is probably going to have a successor, which might be much more libertarian in values, um, probably as if not more socially conservative, but certainly much more fiscally uh, much more I think they might be a tad bit more fiscally conservative, but also quite libertarian in how they approach certain social issues.
That plan. She's said that in a speech recently. Republicans in Congress suggested it, like, let's just raise the retirement age. You think that generation that has known nothing but hardship and wars based on lies and pandemics throughout their whole lives, you think they want to hear that? But beyond that, what is your plan? What is your economic plan, Republicans? Can anyone watching this tell me what a Republican economic plan is? And tell me who is pushing it and what it would do for the country? Anyone?
Well, I can tell you as of right now, Gen Z is more likely than not going to have the proportional impact on the political stage as the their the number of people in their generations would suggest, because more likely than not, Gen Zers are not going to go out there and vote in proportion to their numbers. I just don't think that's going to happen. Voting polls usually show that younger people just don't vote as much. All statistics point to younger people not voting as much as their older counterparts. And as of right now, it seems that the Republican Party is about to be led by Gen Xers, and not only Gen Xers, but a bunch of neocon Gen Xers who are so excited about getting us into a global conflict, be it with Russia or be it with China, or be it with Iran. Oh my God, they're creaming in their pants to go fight Iran. And guess who's going to have to fight these wars? They're going to have to draft young people. And as of right now, that looks like, wait, let me see. Yeah, Gen Zers. And I can tell you, Gen Z is no shape to go fight a war at this very moment. I can promise you that. If they institute a draft and they try to draft Gen Z, it is going to be a disaster. And I'm calling it here now. So if we do see an international conflict which involves the United States and which is spurred on by the neocons, especially the neocons of the Party of the Elephant, just know that I predicted it here. Let's continue.
The answer is no, you can't, because such a thing doesn't exist. I am 40 years old. Throughout my lifetime, Republicans have had one plan. Other than outside of culture war stuff, I'm talking about one actual legislative plan. My entire life, that one plan has been to cut taxes. It's been trickle down economics my entire life. Every time Republicans get power, first thing they want to do is cut taxes. We've already seen the Republican majority in the House of Representatives propose cutting taxes again, extending the Trump tax cuts. It doesn't work. And this generation knows it. This generation isn't afraid to call it out. They're not buying into those lies of Reaganomics, and they're angry. And as long as Republicans continue to push that, they will never attract these younger generations. We have to take a quick break. I'm Farron Cousins. Again, you can subscribe to my YouTube channels at youtube.com/TheRingOfFire and youtube.com
Yeah, no free promotion here. Just joking. Anywho, this gentleman here, I guess he's not Mr. David Pacman. Be that as it may, the Republican Party will find itself in a precarious state sooner or later. But I believe that it's definitely later. The Republican Party is not standing on strong ground for the future. However, as of right now, I think they have all of the political support which they currently need. The boomers are still going strong. They're still kicking it. So there's really no fear for them within the next couple of elections. So the next two election cycles, and I'm talking, well, the next two presidential election cycles, they should be fine. So that's for 2024 and 2028. They should be fine. However, starting 2032, the Republican Party will have to be in panic mode because they'll be losing a substantial portion of their voters. And if they want to remain as powerful as they have been in the past, they'll have to change strategies politically. They'll have to either adopt some ideals and policies which favor much more to the younger generation, or all they'll have to rely on is essentially waiting for Gen Z and millennials and Gen Xers to elect Democratic representatives and allow those Democratic representatives to flop and just perform horribly in office, and then tell them, hey, the Democrat performed horribly. You should elect me. And then they get into office, and if they flop, then they get kicked out of office. If they stay, well, if they perform well, they get their terms extended. I mean, that's the only avenue that's possible for Republicans, and they're gonna have to decide one. But of course, I'm afraid that the neocons are gonna come through and start World War III. Well, we don't know what World War III will be fought with, but we know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Thank you to the great wisdom of the great Albert Einstein. Anywho, it's the Gen Zer, and I'm out. Peace.